Okay, I'll first quickly explain what this Hangout is about. So the idea for this Hangout is, first of all, Nevin is going to share some general thoughts on the current state of the project. And then afterwards, the idea really is to have the community express questions or concerns that you have. I also gathered some questions from the community or concerns that I want to share to really like given a general update of where we are with the project, what our thoughts are on everything related to the project, and so on. So really just a hangout with the community to give the community a voice and for us to give some feedback to that. And I think that works in both ways. So yeah, Nevin, if you would like to start with some general thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So I think probably a lot of the people in this space were hanging out with us in the consensus space just now, and so probably I don't want to waste people's time repeating things that we just talked about. From my perspective, personally, thinking about the overall progression of the protocol long term. These are just some recent thoughts that we've been having, things we've been thinking about internally. The two major challenges, there's the challenge of implementation of Mainnet, which obviously we're working on right now. There's the short-term challenge of helping the community create our tokens and helping our tokens get into circulation and be used, not just in our app, but in the broader crypto ecosystem, which we're very excited to do. And then in the long term, for that vision that we just talked about with the consensus space, I think that the two main challenges are decentralized governance and the tokenization of everything. And so I'm, the work that I've been doing over the past month, for example, has been, short-term things that are necessary, but also been preparing for the team and the community to focus on those two long-term challenges. And so I'm excited about our momentum. Right now, it's just small internal things, nothing that's like super exciting to announce, but we've brought on a couple of team members recently that have taken over some important duties from me, which is helping with the trajectory of freeing me up to put more effort into leading and building out what's going to be necessary for a decentralized governance research project. And we've recently also brought on two people to begin a sort of very deep and careful decentralized governance research project above and beyond what we've done so far. So that's been my obsession in recent months is like, okay, what do we need to do to lay the groundwork to really innovate in decentralized governance, and then thinking ahead, what's going to be necessary for the tokenization of everything. And on that front, I think that that's even more uncertain. So with decentralized governance, we have a bunch of thoughts about it. We've talked about it a little bit, and we have a community of people who are very smart and we think can make progress in that area. And so we're kind of assembling that and planning how we're going to do that. With the tokenization of everything, like we talked about just now on the consensus space, that ultimately ends up being a legal and regulatory and maybe even political question of like what is allowed to be tokenized. And so there, we don't have a plan yet for what, if anything, we can do to significantly influence that outcome. It could be that the world will just work that out in a way where we don't need to do anything and things will end up being tokenized 5 or 10 years from now. But it may be that there needs to be an active effort to try to cause that to happen. So that's something we're beginning to think about, but we don't have any particular thoughts to share on it. So that's a little bit of perspective in terms of, Sinatra asked me if I could give an update on the protocol implementation. And I can, but there's nothing like super exciting to say about it. It's just like, yep, we continue to work on it every week, and move it forward as quickly as we can. Obviously, it's slower than any of us wanted. There's just there's no two ways about that, and so it's a stressful thing for us internally. We hate that it's taking a long time, but as everyone on this call knows, obviously we have to be super careful about security, and so we're just going to continue at the pace that we're going until it's done. In terms of the particular things that are being worked on with the protocol, I don't think that there's really anything that's super interesting. It's a lot of really low level details, things that when we talk about the protocol, we don't even mention these kinds of things because it's like, having to like rewrite a framework for how certain kinds of exponential math works so that there aren't certain kinds of overflow vulnerabilities, so that there can't be certain kinds of hacks, and a bunch of minutia that you have to get right with something like this, but which isn't exactly exciting to tweet about. So we're just kind of in it. We're just kind of doing all of those little details as quickly as we can on the protocol implementation side. But I wanted to open up a community space to just hang out and discuss in a little bit less directed a way than we have in our recent public conversations, to just kind of give people the opportunity to ask or share ideas or questions, whatever they may be, and discuss them. And part of that is, honestly, part of that is the price. It's like I'm not. I usually don't talk about the price. The project isn't about the price. But like crypto has been crashing, and the RSR price has been going down, and I think that often triggers a lot of concerns. It causes people to worry more about things that maybe they knew about but weren't as worried about. And so I just wanted to open up and have a conversation. If there's anything that people are concerned about, I'm down to have a discussion about it. So I guess, Sinatra, can you moderate, like, if there are questions that have been sort of pre-registered that you want to ask, we could start off with those, and then I'll leave it to you to add people to speak if people want to ask questions.
Yes, that's perfect, and that's exactly what I prepared too. One thing, by the way, I wanna mention that I noticed is if you join this, what I love about hearing your general thoughts on the project right now is if you joined a space, a reserve space, maybe 6 months back or maybe a year back, it was all about the app. Even if you spoke about something, it was all about the reserve app. So it was very clear that the focus was purely on the app. And what I love about you just giving these general updates is you can clearly see how the focus is now, at least for you as the CEO, is clearly shifting to more the long-term view. You're talking about tokenization, more focus on governance. I assume you're working more on the long-term art token, thinking about that stuff. And so I think it's a cool thing to notice that there's clearly this shift from purely focusing on the app to more the protocol side and maybe the long-term goal. The way I want to do this space is, first of all, this is a community call. So if anyone here has any questions that you'd like to ask Nevin or Gabo directly, then please just request to speak, and we'll bring you up. And what I've also done is, I'm one of the community managers for the RSR community, and so we get a lot of questions and to be honest, also some concerns from the community that I'd love to be able to address now, and I'd like to kind of voice the community. So I have a list in case we don't have too many questions. I have a list of some of the things that I think the community is most has the most questions about. And so, and it's related to something you said just now, Nevin, which is related to the RSR price. So I'll start with that one, and then I see someone has requested. We'll bring you up in just a second. Before we do that, Nevin, the first question I'd like to ask you is something that you can clearly see if you follow the Reserve project is that there's been a tremendous amount of adoption on the Reserve app side. From expansions to new countries to partnerships with Reserve is accepted in McDonald's, in Burger King. Recently, we announced a partnership with Mercado Libre. So that's all awesome news. But a comment that I often get from the RSR community is they're saying, well, that's all cool. Like, it's awesome that there's so much success on the Reserve app side. But we, as the RSR holders, it almost seems like we're not capturing a portion of that value, of that success. Could you speak a bit on if there is a correlation between the success of the Reserve app and the RSR holders? Should RSR holders be excited about the Reserve app progressing? And if not, is that going to come in the future, or like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, totally. So um, let me share one caveat and then kind of try to give my answer to that question. The caveat is that the Reserve app gaining in popularity. Well, no, I have to do this the other way around. So okay, so basically, as an RSR holder, and I'm a big RSR holder myself. Um, if you think about the basic economics of how the Reserve app fits in for you, it's really that the more people use the Reserve app and store their money that way, the greater the circulating supply, the greater the market cap of R tokens, right? Because R tokens will be the balances of the Reserve app. And so, if those balances are only a million versus 100 million or a billion or 10 billion or 100 billion, that makes an enormous difference to the staking opportunities that you have available to you, right? So in the long term, as an RSR holder who chooses to stake, really what matters to you is the yields that are being offered by any particular R token, or by the total set of R tokens combined, rather, and that total market cap of all the R tokens combined. So, these are pieces that like haven't come together yet, right? Like obviously, right now, if there's a larger market cap of of stable coins held in the Reserve app, that doesn't actually make money for anyone. We don't make money on that. RSR holders don't make money on that. Um, but in the future, when those app balances are R tokens, then those are directly balances that you as an RSR holder will be able to stake on. And so the bigger that number, the more the staking opportunity. Now, the caveat I just want to add is that it's not free money, right? It's not like we're saying we'll make the app popular and then you'll just get direct passive income with no effort. You have to choose what to stake on. So you do have to, do some research and make a decision and make your own risk assessment. And you are putting your RSR at stake when you stake it, because in the event of, a black swan event, your RSR could be seized by the protocol, which I think most people on this call probably understand. So it's not exactly free money, it's not a dividend, but it does mean that you really do want the Reserve app and all other uses of R tokens to be as big as possible. And the Reserve app is obviously sort of the initial flagship use case, but we hope that R tokens get adopted very broadly throughout the crypto ecosystem. So it's not the case that we forecast people being dependent on only the Reserve app, but the progress is definitely meaningful in a financial opportunity sense for RSR holders, simply because the higher the market cap of our tokens, the more staking opportunity there will be.
Right. And do you have a timeline or a reference for time? When do you see a first R token being integrated into the app?
It's ultimately that will be up to the app team, and they have many different priorities that they juggle. So I don't want to, we've made the mistake of naming a specific timeline in the past, only to decide not to do that or find out something takes longer than we thought. So we don't have a specific timeline, but basically, what I can say is that we're very excited about offering some of the features that we think our tokens will have, like a yield-bearing stablecoin, to the users of the Reserve app. And we as RSR holders are excited about there beginning to be staking opportunities. So we're sort of all on the same team there. There's not. I don't think that there's any reason to wait, other than making sure that our tokens are secure enough. Making sure that we're not going to expose the users to undue risk, and that means that they might have to exist for a little while before we're totally comfortable, and then also making sure that we don't spend development or sort of team time on that if it really slows down something else that would have caused like a big spurt of growth, right? If we're about to open a new country that we think is going to be really huge, or something, then maybe we would prioritize that for a while before adding support for a new R token. Those kind of priorities might trade off. But all of that being said, I anticipate that it won't be that long after mainnet launch that we would end up starting to offer those tokens in the app, because that's sort of the purpose and the plan all along.
Great, thank you for that. We have Texi.eth with a question. Are you here, Texi?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and very exciting progress. I just have a one small question to dive a bit deeper into that progress towards seeing the use case of RSR and the functionality of staking and the rewards that are attached to it. Because I've seen something in the ballpark of like some on-chain mainnet and off-chain. I was wondering if you could elaborate to us a little bit what the difference is, and obviously if we start with off-chain mainnet, will this already include the potential staking and rewards for the RSR holders, or is this something we can only expect in the on-chain?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So when we talk about on-chain versus off-chain, usually what we're talking about is the way that users in the Reserve app are holding and spending their tokens, right? Where off-chain would mean that, we as a company are holding them in custody, and they can transact kind of, within our database, similar to sending from one Coinbase user to another. Whereas on-chain, the user is holding their own key and making a transaction directly on the blockchain or on a sidechain. And the answer is that regardless of whether users are holding their coins on chain or whether we're holding them, and thus they're transacting off chain, in both cases, there will be the same staking opportunity, right? Because let's say that there's, whatever, $10 million worth of a particular R token that's being used in the app. Whether the users are holding it themselves or whether we're holding it for them, that's still $10 million worth of capital in that R token's ecosystem. And if that R token is generating revenue by, via lending, basically via the underlying collateral assets having been lent out, then it doesn't really matter who's holding the capital, or who's holding those R tokens in their wallet. In either case, the RSR stakers still have the ability to stake. So basically what that boils down to is, as an RSR holder, you don't have to wait for the Reserve app to have on-chain user custody functionality for you to have a staking opportunity. That'll happen even if users are transacting off-chain. And for the protocol itself, just to make sure this is clear, there isn't any sense of there being an off-chain version of the protocol itself. That's, obviously just running in Ethereum smart contracts, so that's all happening on-chain. So the off-chain question is just kind of how are people actually holding those R tokens?
Okay, thank you very much. It's very clear. Just when in regards to the on-chain and off-chain, when we can expect to go over to the on-chain, does this mean that the original assets that are being held in your custody will remain off-chain forever, or are you also planning as a company to move them on-chain?
Right. So okay. So let's go through an example there. So let's say that, let's just use the current RSV, even though that's not really a fully featured R token. We can still use that as an example. So right now we hold all of that RSV in cold storage on behalf of our users. Our users can choose to withdraw it. So if they have a balance in the app, they can choose to withdraw the RSV and send it to their MetaMask or to an exchange or whatever. But within our app, we don't have any way for them to hold their own keys. So they have to use a third-party crypto wallet like Argent or MetaMask or something to do that. Let's say we were to add the on-chain feature where they could hold the key to their assets and transact themselves within the Reserve app. If we did that, then any individual user at that point would be able to choose, okay, I want to sort of like withdraw my coins, but not really move them outside of this app. I just want to hold them myself in the Reserve app. And so in that case, what would happen, they would tap some buttons, and then our system would do a blockchain transaction that sent some of that RSV from our custody to to their address, so that they could hold it themselves. But in this hypothetical world, if the app allowed both at the same time, then they would be able to. Then they would just, that app would be holding the key. They'd be able to do the transactions on chain from within the Reserve app instead of having to go to MetaMask or Argent or something else to do that. And so We haven't talked about this a whole lot publicly. It's something I mentioned just now in the consensus space. But basically, we've come to think that it makes sense to offer both methods for people, where people could choose to do the off-chain transactions or to hold the coins themselves and transact on-chain, and give them the choice. And there's actually a couple different possible ways that that could happen. That could actually be two separate apps, or that could be one app with both functionalities at the same time. And that's something that the team hasn't made that decision yet. We've consciously decided that for the short term, the most important thing for the ecosystem overall is to focus on growing the user base of RPay as much as possible. And right now, the most effective way to do that is to continue offering the off-chain transaction mechanism. In the future, we think that that can and likely will shift. And so there's definitely a commitment to offering people the ability to transact on-chain. But we think that we'll end up being able to offer both options in parallel and just give people the choice. You could even do some of each. You could have some that's held in cloud custody and some that you hold yourself, so that you can interact with different DeFi applications with those coins, for example.
Okay, thank you, Nevin. It's very good to hear, and I very much agree that the option should be there for the users to decide. And obviously, very happy to hear that the rewards for the RSR staking is no matter on chain or off chain will be there. So, thanks for your time, and I'll give the mic to someone else now.
Thank you, Bexy. Good question. Let's go to DShot256. Are you here?
Yes, I am. Guys, thanks for the opportunity. And first off, you guys are doing a great job. Nevin, especially you and the rest of the team, really happy with the progress you guys make. And at least I have a lot of faith in what Reserve is trying to achieve. Just a quick question around, the layer 1 protocol on top of which, Reserve runs, which is Ethereum. Question is integration with any other layer 1 protocol? There are so many out there, whether it's Algorand, Solana, etc. Is that something that's on the roadmap? And would doing something like that have any impact on price action?
It's a good question. So the way I see it, there are two kinds of support for these other blockchains that can be offered. One is obviously just to allow the R tokens themselves, once they've been created and minted, to be bridged to other blockchains. And the other version of this would be to actually implement the protocol itself in sort of an entirely new implementation on different blockchains, and allow people to create native R tokens on those other blockchains, which might mean rewriting smart contracts in Rust or something like that. In the near term, we don't have any intention of doing that second one. We don't have any intention of developing alternate versions of the protocol on other blockchains. Instead, we intend to try to support and facilitate the movement of our tokens cross-chain from Ethereum to other blockchains if people want to use them there. And a lot of that is actually kind of baked in at this point, right? It's like there are some general purpose bridges that would be usable in those cases. There are some cases where there is no general purpose bridge yet, and we've looked into and are considering implementing a specific bridge mechanism. But really the question of whether the R token system itself, the Reserve protocol itself, should only be on Ethereum or should exist on other blockchains, that ends up in the long term being determined by which assets are available natively on these different blockchains. So like if there's a future world where there are a lot of tokenized assets that have all been tokenized on Solana and they weren't also tokenized on Ethereum, right? Like you can sort of, like, to make an analogy, imagine that USDC existed on Solana but didn't exist on Ethereum at all. Then that could potentially compel us or others in the community to re-implement the same protocol, but on another layer 1 blockchain to take advantage of the different possible baskets that you could compose on that blockchain with the natively tokenized assets there. And so it really is a question in the long term about network effects of these layer one blockchains and where it is the case that things will be tokenized if and when they do get tokenized. And so we're currently making, sort of the moderate assumption that Ethereum will continue to be a natural place where if you are going to tokenize stuff, you'll do it there, maybe along with other blockchains. But if that turns out not to be true, if Ethereum falls out of favor, then it's possible for the protocol to, it's just a protocol. It's just a set of rules, and so we or really anyone else could implement a version of it on other blockchains. And now there's the question about like exactly how that would relate to RSR. You asked like how would that relate to price action. I think that it's an interesting thing where the way that the protocol works, it's a set of factory smart contracts where anyone can basically make a new copy of the protocol to create a new R token. And when you do that, it naturally, like by default, allows the staking of RSR. And so you actually could create a similar set of factory smart contracts on another layer one blockchain, and you could bridge the RSR token to that other blockchain so that you still only really have one RSR, that it sort of exists in a cross-chain way. And then you could have that set of smart contracts use the same RSR token or the bridged version of it. And so in that sense, as long as there's a trustworthy enough way to bridge any token from Ethereum to any other blockchain, which is a little bit questionable, honestly. There's been some hacks with the existing bridges so far, and so hopefully that technology will improve and become more trustless. But to the extent that that really happens and RSR can exist as a cross-chain asset itself pretty natively, then there's really nothing stopping the protocol from existing on multiple different blockchains with that full implementation. And you could take advantage of the RSR network effect, for staking and insurance provision across the different blockchains. So that's a possibility. I wouldn't be super surprised if that happens in the long term, but it's not something that we feel the need to focus on in the short term, because in the short term, we think everything that gets tokenized that's interesting will exist on Ethereum.
Got it. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for the question.
All right, next up we have Reserve Weekly. Are you here?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hey, so we were talking about custody earlier for the off-chain R tokens, and the question of like custody, how Reserve will handle that, kind of in the near term and the long term interest me. And so I know that Coinbase currently offers custody services for RSR. I don't know if they do that for the slow wallet, etc. But is Reserve interested itself, or is it already doing it in terms of custodying these tokens?
Yeah, it's a good question. We, out of necessity, we've been the custodian of RSV for app users, and there's some potential projects that we're looking into that can't really say anything about publicly right now that might cause us to expand our custody operations, but we definitely don't see ourselves as like a custody company primarily. We don't anticipate offering like RSR custody for any reason. But I think the main thing is just that like as RPay expands, as the balances within RPay expand, we really have to build out more and more custody and security infrastructure, because while those coins are being held by us and transacted off chain, that's just an increasing amount of value that we have to protect on behalf of our users. So, there's a possible world where we actually end up outsourcing that to a third-party custodian that's like totally specialized in that. But so far, we haven't felt the need to do that. And I think actually, to make sure we can facilitate transactions in a pretty seamless way, it totally could be the case that we just continue to grow custody for our tokens, for app users at the very least. But I guess I should say that's something that like we don't charge people for that custody, right? Like with Coinbase custody or Binance offers custody services like that, you pay some number of basis points per year to hold tokens in custody for like very large amounts. In this case, we're offering that service for free to users with the idea that the app will be able to sustain itself from revenues from other sources.
Okay, that makes sense. If I could ask also, this is obviously not within the scope of this discussion, but I think more people would be interested in knowing kind of more about that process in a way that doesn't really expose too much information.
Of how the custody works, you mean?
Yeah, I personally don't understand that at all.
Yeah, it basically, I think it is better to, not talk too much about any of the details, just for the sake of security. But, essentially, it's a system that is, based on cold storage. So, coins are not being held by any computers that are connected to the internet. The process of making any sort of large withdrawal is something that requires many different people and many different off-chain, sort of offline operations to complete. And we use HSMs, which are hardware security modules, to store those keys. So it's a pretty conservative operation. Then there's also a hot wallet that stores a very small amount of RSV, so that if a user of the app wants to make a small withdrawal, less than, I don't know exactly how much the hot wallet holds, but like, it's gonna be like less than 100K or something, then that can be processed quickly because those coins can be held by a computer that's online. And then if necessary, that hot wallet can be periodically, refilled by coins that are held in cold storage. And that's going to be similar, I think, to most exchanges. There'll be some combination of cold storage and hot storage in order to be able to process withdrawals fast enough, but also have the bulk of the assets, pretty much totally untouchable by anyone on the internet.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Reserve Weekly. Nevin, a question that I, as a community manager in the RSR community, get a lot and probably most is the following. And I want to word it in such a way how our most critical people would word it, just so we get to the core of what a lot of people are wondering. And so the question is, why? And I'm going to word it as I sometimes hear it. I hope you you understand that. Why does it take the reserve team so long to deliver mainnet? I've seen arguments of people in the community saying, well, I know this project and they were developing a blockchain and they could deliver their mainnet in only a few months. So how could it be that Reserve Protocol is taking so long? Is it just because the reserve engineers are just really slow, or are they just really inexperienced in developing? Or what's the reason? Why does it take so long to develop mainnet?
Well, there's really, I think, fundamentally two reasons. The first reason is that we put it off for a long time. And when I say we put it off, what I mean is we decided, okay, we've launched this very simple kind of alpha version in order to support RSV. And now we're going to put all of our effort into building out the app and building out the ecosystem around the app. And so even people who are today working on mainnet development, they were actually doing app development that whole time. And me and everybody else on the team were fully focused on the app. We just decided, okay, let's wait. And we did that for a couple of reasons. We did that first off because we wanted the like we really just thought that there wasn't a way to use crypto as money in the markets we wanted to target. And so we decided, okay, it's actually necessary for somebody to build this, to make this infrastructure available, to make it so that you can easily convert your money, say, from bolivars to dollar stablecoins and back. That was part of it. The other part was, like, I was actually thinking about like the tokenomics of the situation. I was thinking, man, if we launch the protocol right now and all of the locked tokens unlock, and and there isn't an existing user base that's excited about our tokens from the beginning, then maybe that could actually be pretty bad for the overall tokenomic situation. So I was thinking to myself, well, if we can build out an ecosystem of users and then launch the protocol within the context of that ecosystem of users, where there's initial existing demand and lots of growth and excitement about the project, that would be better for the tokenomics. So those are kind of the two reasons why we put it off. The second reason for things going slowly is, even once we resumed focusing on the protocol and on launching the mainnet version of the protocol, it's very, very complicated. To be clear about it, it's a very complicated piece of software from a blockchain perspective. It's still way fewer lines of code than our app, but every line of code is obviously critical. And so, to put that in context, the complexity of the protocol conceptually and in terms of the number of lines of code is it's pretty similar to the MakerDAO protocol. Maybe it might be a little bit more complicated. And so, like, when we, if we go and compare to the MakerDAO development timeline, the time it took to get from single collateral DAI, the sort of initial beta version, to launching multi-collateral DAI, we're actually not going any slower. We're actually going like pretty much the same pace for the development. And the thing is that so really the problem, the error, I think, there was at the beginning, we thought we could do it faster. We essentially, we sort of thought through the steps on a high level and didn't really adequately take into account all of the complexity that you get into when you're in the weeds, when you're making every single choice that has to be made and realizing, oh, okay, wait, if we do the math this way in this particular method, then that actually means that this other thing that we plan to do won't quite work. And so the process of developing, it's not as simple as like we decided, okay, this is exactly how the protocol should work, and then people just have to write the code, right? It's like the way that it actually ends up panning out is like, okay, you get in to write some code, and you realize, wait a minute, this assumption we made, it's kind of not 100% true. It's actually only like 99.8% true, and there's these cases where that's not quite going to work. It's like, okay, that's fine. We just have to change this one other thing. Okay, but then when you change that one other thing, you realize, well, wait a minute, but that actually affects the way that we were thinking about this other part. And so it's kind of an evolution of like careful refinement of the protocol on a conceptual level, not a high level. Like the high level fundamentals are not changing at all right now, but like the specific details of like exactly how do the protocol mechanisms work, those have to be thought about carefully while writing the code and gas optimizing the code and optimizing the code to do the math in the right way to make sure that there aren't rounding errors and all of that. And so that takes a long time. And I do think that, I don't want to try to say that like there would not be any way to do it faster. It's like if we had more of the absolute best blockchain developers in the world on our team working full time on this, maybe it would be going faster. And so if we had focused on trying to recruit those people, maybe we could have made it go faster. And I lay awake at night sometimes thinking like, man, maybe we really should have done that. Maybe we took the wrong approach. So I do think that there are things that could be done to make it go faster potentially, but it's still just the kind of thing where there is that complexity in reality, and you can't get around that. You can't rush it. You sort of just have to think everything through to the fundamental level and make sure that you're not getting anything wrong. So so again, I'm not trying to say that there's no possible way we could have done it better. We are flawed humans, and I'm sure that there's mistakes we've made along the way where we could have somehow gone faster. But those are the two fundamental things. Number one, putting it off for those reasons I stated. And number two, just the intense complexity of the challenge.
Would it be correct to say, Nevin, because I personally have kind of the idea that the development itself is going as it should, and I see how much how careful the developers are in the development, and so I think they're doing it the right way. And you can see how many commits they perform each week on our GitHub page, so you can see that like they're doing everything they can. Would you agree, Nevin, that kind of the issue or the error we made, and I do think that might be an issue on Reserve side, is the way it was communicated by announcing these dates, which we thought would be we would be able to make, but we eventually didn't. We created inaccurate expectations within the community, and that's ultimately why there's this general idea of why protocol development is so slow. Do you agree with that? It's more a communication issue rather than an engineering issue?
I mean, I definitely think that it was a huge mistake to forecast and announce particular dates so far in advance. I really regret that. And I wish we had come up with the system that we have now of just showing the progress, you know, in a simple dashboard to the community from the beginning. I think that would have been a lot better. And I definitely, you know, when I talk to other crypto founders, I suggest that they do it that way now, because I think that's a lot better. So I take the blame for doing that. You know, I wanted to figure out the timeline and announce it so that people would know, so that people could have expectations and have a sense of when things would happen. But it turned out to be too difficult to predict. And you know, and the same, I will note that like the same thing's happening with the Ethereum merge. It keeps getting pushed back, and there's a lot of distaste about that. And so, but I don't think that that's the, you know, it's not that that's the only problem. Like it definitely is the case that I think even if we had that dashboard the whole time, people still would be dissatisfied with our pace, because you know there are a lot of projects that they just do develop a lot faster. And part of that is that they're not as complex. And in some cases, there's just projects that are willing to take a lot more risk. You know, if you're, especially if you're like an anonymous DeFi project, but even if you're not anonymous, if you're just kind of short-term minded and thinking about like, well, let's get to market, let's try to cause excitement, and maybe there will be a pump, and maybe we can sell tokens for a lot of money, like your incentives force you to just like do things really quickly, and that leads to exploits and mistakes happening. You know, not in 100% of cases, but in a significant number of cases. So I think that like it is definitely true that other teams move faster than we do. But if you look at teams that really take it seriously, like the MakerDAO team, for example, they don't move faster. They actually do things that are very similar to what we're doing. So it's kind of a, you know, if someone is, you know, participating in the project on a short-term speculative basis, you know, I understand that it must be like really, really annoying because we're not succumbing to those local incentives. We're trying to keep in mind this very, very long-term view where we like make sure that we get it right, and we're thinking about, you know, the potential for long-term massive success. And so yeah, so I think that as well as the communication challenge of having announced a specific date are kind of the fundamental problems there.
Thank you, Nevin. One thing I must say, something that I appreciate personally, and it's going to be easy for me to say as a community manager, but I was part of the RSR community before, and I've been part of many different crypto projects. Something that I do admire from you, Nevin, is that whatever the situation, you're always willing to step in front of the community and talk to the community, explain things. You're also not afraid to give it, like explain if we've made issues. You're not afraid to to comment on that. So that is something I certainly appreciate. Next question, one reminder, if people here want to ask direct questions to Nevin, you are free to request a speaker in the Twitter spaces and we'll bring you up. Nevin, I have a DM from a person that wants to remain anonymous, and he says it's about tokenomics. He says he's a really big fan of the project, always has been, but there is a piece of consistent FUD, he calls it, that he sees reappearing in our channels. His question is, could you address the consistent FUD about the 100 billion max supply of RSR? And he adds, a lot of people compare the max supply to other crypto tokens max supply, and he sees that often other projects have a smaller max supply. Is that an issue? Is max supply an issue, or anything to comment on that?
Yeah, so I guess the way I think about it is that, like, what matters to me is not really the number of RSR tokens, it's the percentages of RSR tokens, right? So, like, let's say we had only created, 100,000 tokens total instead of 100 billion. If we had, sold off and awarded as compensation and so on the same percentage of tokens that we had, up until now of the current RSR, then I think that the overall economics would be basically exactly the same. Each RSR token would be worth a lot more, but everyone would have way fewer RSR tokens. So in that sense, I've never really understood the concern about the specific number of RSR tokens. It's like, to me, it sort of doesn't matter if it's 100 billion or 100,000 or 100 tokens, as long as they're infinitely divisible, or for all practical purposes divisible enough, then it's kind of the same thing. And so, we picked that number semi-arbitrarily. And I think in part, anyway, there's various idiosyncratic reasons, but it doesn't really matter that much, I think. The thing is, like, if there's something that someone should be concerned about, or wants to be concerned about, I think you should look at the percentages and think about whether you feel okay or not about the way that we've chosen to handle the tokens, because I think those are the more consequential choices we've made, right? Like, we decided to sell off X amount to initial seed purchasers in order to get the project off the ground. We decided to award Y amount to to the initial team pre-mainnet, and those numbers, for people's reference, if you don't know, I think it's roughly something like 13.5% went to those initial seed purchasers, and then 20% was set aside for, like, everyone who's part of the project up until mainnet, and then there've been some other cases, more recently, where we compensate companies or individuals in liquid RSR tokens, and then some have been sold. Obviously, some have been sold on public markets, and then we use those funds to pay for the project itself. And so that has kind of brought us to where we are in terms of the number of tokens, the amount that are still held by the project, and are ultimately under my governance to decide what to do with, but that are project tokens versus the ones that have been spent or awarded so far. I personally think that, I mean, it's been, I've been the one guiding the decision making process, so obviously it kind of makes sense that I would think that it's been done well, because if not, I would have done it some other way. But I personally think that the tokens so far have been spent pretty responsibly. Like, I think we've been pretty careful to not waste them, to try to carefully allocate them as well as possible, to try to get basically as much progress on the project per token spent or allocated or what have you as we possibly can. And looking back, there's certainly some things in retrospect where it's like, well, okay, that particular initiative didn't work out, but you can never tell those things as you go. So I pretty much stand by the way that we've allocated the tokens so far. And then, we have a certain amount left over, which you can see in our slow wallet contract that can be allocated in the future. And those will be allocated to probably a broad diversity of different things. And we'll just do our best to be reasonable in how they get allocated. And we don't have a specific release schedule or a specific set of commitments for exactly how they'll be allocated. I think that some flexibility is warranted. If we had pre-programmed it all at the very beginning, I think that there's certain things that we wouldn't have been able to do along the way that we did up until now that have been productive. So there is some flexibility there, but yeah, I think that there shouldn't be a reason to worry about the absolute number. If there's anything to take issue with, you should look at the percentages and the way that they've been allocated and the way that you think we might allocate them in the future, and debate that. And I'm very happy to have that debate, and to try to understand the thoughts from the community on how those tokens ought to be allocated. I will say that there have been proposals along the way that I disagree with. For example, some people think that we should take a significant portion of the tokens that remain and just burn them. And I understand the appeal. It's like, okay, if you make it so that tokens that are locked up can never enter circulation in the future, then it does, in a sense, inherently increase the value of the existing tokens. But it also means that the project has, less capital to allocate in order to get to a successful outcome. And so when I think about the amount of progress that could be made with, let's take an example. Let's say that there's $100 million worth of tokens. If you just burn them, you could think about the progress for the project that would cause, just burning them, versus slowly allocating them over the course of several years to a bunch of strategic initiatives like development or research or marketing or what have you, through grants or through a DAO or however that might work. It seems to me like $100 million allocated well over the course of several years is probably a lot more useful for the project than just burning those tokens and having sort of the short-term excitement of like, okay, those tokens have been taken off the table. So it's not that I will do whatever community members request, but I'm definitely down to have the debate and try to figure out what is the best way to allocate those tokens.
Thank you for that, Nevin. I think that was a sufficient answer for the person asking. So I hope that is clear for him. I want to focus a bit on the future of Reserve in the protocol. But before we do that, Nevin, a quick time check because we're on the hour now. Do you have a few more minutes, or do you have somewhere to be?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So I want to first give some context for the people that are here from the consensus call, or people that don't know the protocol as well as our senior community members, let's call them. So the main, I would say the main place where we are now from the protocol perspective is we're developing what we call Mainnet launch. And what that means is basically the full Reserve protocol launching on Ethereum Mainnet. And from that point on, once we have that launch, we have a platform. I like to refer to it as the R token platform. And what an R token is basically a Reserve stablecoin. And what this platform will allow is it will allow anyone to permissionlessly create an asset-backed stablecoin. And in the consensus call, we kind of went into why we chose this platform approach and what the use cases of these different R tokens, so Reserve stablecoins, might be. But I want to ask a question, Nevin, that I've seen pop up in our channels after some hints that we've, well, hints is too subtle, maybe some mentions that we've done in recent AMAs, and that is the following. You've hinted before, and I have also done the same in AMAs and even in the consensus call. You've mentioned that the idea is that the Reserve core team will not create R tokens themselves. Instead, we will share our thoughts on what we think good stablecoins, reserve stablecoins might be, and we then let the community create these R tokens. Some people have some concerns about that in our community because they feel like, or their question is, what does that mean? Does that mean that Reserve just creates a protocol and then we're hands off and now it's up to the community? Okay, but who's then going to make sure that these R tokens grow? So could you kind of give your idea for why it is better to have the community create R tokens and not the Reserve core team? Like, what's the thinking behind that, and how do you think that's going to play out? And what role does the Reserve core team still have on R tokens that the community creates?
Yeah, good question. So let me say the way that I think it will play out and then talk about the reasons. So I think that there are some natural types of R tokens that would make sense given the existing available collateral assets on Ethereum. And so I think that we will share our thoughts about those, as we've already done, talking about like creating a yield-bearing stablecoin, for example. And so I think what will happen is, we will, through documentation and through, direct interaction, perhaps workshops and in other venues, we'll make sure that technical members of the community and entrepreneurial members of the community understand how to create our tokens, and they will. And so we'll start to see them popping up, even though we won't create them ourselves. And the fact that we won't create them doesn't mean that we won't promote them. We will promote them. We will promote them by selecting effective R tokens to feature in the Reserve app. And I anticipate that we also will promote them through business development and other activities within the broader crypto ecosystem. So I anticipate that we will probably put in time and energy and money to getting our tokens listed, and educating people in the crypto community of their existence and promoting their usage, etc. And so, but we'll do that by, we'll look at the R tokens that are being created and we'll evaluate from our perspective which ones are safe and legitimate and attractive. And I think we ourselves, even just the project and its treasury, is a potential R token user, right? So we'll be looking at them in some cases, just thinking about like, well, where should the project capital be stored? Like, which of these R tokens would we be comfortable putting our own money in? And that's a good sign. If we think it's attractive and safe to put our own capital into an R token, that's a good sign that we would think that it would make sense for other people to do that too. And so then in that case, we'd be more apt to promote that R token versus others that might be, might have some issue from our perspective. So the fact that we won't create them ourselves, I think won't really get in the way of the process of our tokens being created and studied and talked about and adopted in the crypto ecosystem. Why not? Why not just go ahead and create them ourselves? Well, I think there's kind of there's two different layers of answer there. It is relevant to technical legal analysis, who created a crypto asset originally. And that is one reason. But I think that maybe the sort of philosophical answer is a little bit more interesting. It's like, we don't want, like the goal here wasn't to create a, typical Silicon Valley startup company that would then be the centralized governor of the future world currency. Like I just don't think it makes sense for there to be like a world reserve currency that is governed by a tech company. Even if it becomes a big tech company, right? Like you don't want Facebook or Google or Apple or whatever governing the world's currency. Maybe you do, but I don't. I think it should be something that is done in a more neutral and more decentralized way. And so by making the commitment up front to saying like we are never going to deploy an R token ourselves. We are only going to write the software and deploy this platform and allow others to create these stablecoins. I think we just make it very clear from the very beginning that that this isn't a case of pretend decentralization. This isn't a case of a company is actually just acting as a company, but they've written some blockchain software and they're trying to dress it up as a decentralized thing, in order to like evade some laws or something. And so I think that it might mean a slightly slower start to initial R tokens being deployed, because we have to go through that extra step of educating the community and empowering them to do it. But that's actually the point. We want to force ourselves to grow this as a community, sort of open platform, where if we could just create them ourselves, maybe we wouldn't get around to doing as good a job at educating people and empowering people and convincing people that they can and showing them the benefits of doing so and whatever. But if we commit, like, no, we're not going to do it ourselves, then we really set ourselves that challenge of like, we really need to make sure that there are, technical and entrepreneurial community members who understand it and get it and will do it. And I think, that can be a sort of like a, I don't know what the word is, almost a mimetic process where if you see others doing it, you'll kind of come to understand that you can too, right? It's almost maybe a little bit hard to believe or hard to think about at the beginning of like, oh, I'm going, like, how many people on this call right now really believe that they themselves are going to create a novel R token? Maybe one or two, maybe three or something, but probably not everybody. But if you've seen lots of people do it and you're like, huh, actually anyone can do that, and I kind of understand how it works now because I've like heard these other people explain it, that will inspire more. And so I think that the more the better. We want exploration, we want competition, and so I think this is the right way to kick us off in that direction.
Thank you, Nevin. Nevin, let me know if you have time for one more question, because I have one question that I really want to ask as the last one.
Yeah, I have time actually for a couple more questions. My next meeting isn't until the top of the next hour.
Perfect. Well, if you look at, since we're talking about creation of R tokens and anyone being able to do that, so the protocol, once the protocol is live, anyone can interact with the protocol itself. But the way that the interaction will work is probably not through the smart contract itself, because you need to be really technical for that, and the majority of the people won't be able to interact with the protocol, with the smart contracts themselves. So the way the majority of the people will interact with the protocol will be through a web-based app or a DApp. It's a decentralized app. A lot of people are excited to see what's possible in the app and also the way that it looks. Could you talk a bit on the features that will be available in the DApp? And also, when do you think the community will be able to see what it actually looks like?
Well, I think that they'll be able to see what it looks like fairly soon, because a bunch of those designs are being converted from. I think we're to a point where it probably makes sense to start sharing those pretty soon. I'm not sure exactly when. In terms of the functionality that will exist in that initial DApp, let's kind of walk through it. So, sort of at the beginning, you have the creation of R tokens. And so the plan is to allow people to do that through the DApp. And then like another activity you might want to do is going and looking at all of the R tokens that exist and seeing their sort of comparative stats and the features. So that will happen through a homepage that's a little bit like looking at the CoinMarketCap homepage, but where the tokens that exist on that page are R tokens. And then if you have R tokens in your wallet, that homepage, the plan is also to show you information about the assets that you have in your wallet. So it kind of functions as like an account homepage if you're connected, if you have a connected account. and just like an overview of our tokens homepage if you don't. Then obviously, minting and redeeming our tokens is a key activity that probably ordinary users actually won't really need to do or want to do because it does cost significant gas, and it happens on ETH-L1. But arbitrageurs and market makers will need to do that, usually with like large quantities at a time. So you'll be able to do that in the dApp. And that's kind of similar to the simple portal that we have now for RSV, although this has a lot more features and is kind of a more developed application. And then staking and unstaking is obviously something that RSR holders will want to do. So as an RSR holder, you can go and you can look at different R tokens. You can see their comparative stats. You can see basically what the projected APY would be if the numbers stay the same as they are now. Or I think that I think the way it's implemented is based on 30-day rolling averages. And so you can kind of do that research and decide where you want to stake. Then you can actually take the action of staking as well as taking the action of unstaking whenever you want to. I'm trying to remember if there's another category of functionality. There's also governance, and there's also auction participation. So, but these are interesting because these actually can happen on separate UIs. So there will be, for any given R token, if it's deployed with the default governance mechanism that we're offering. Remember that you can also deploy an R token with a different governance mechanism if you choose to. But if it's deployed with the default mechanism, then you can you'll be able to click a link to go to a separate interface like Tally, which you may have interacted with for other token voting protocols. And so you can vote on proposals in that separate interface. It's still interacting with the reserved smart contracts, but through that separate interface. And similarly, if the protocol for any particular R token has like rebalancing that it needs to do to trade out of one collateral asset into another, that works with Gnosis Auction. And Gnosis Auction has its own UI built by the Gnosis team. And so similarly there, rather than reinvent the wheel, you'll be able to see that there's open auctions and then click and go to that Gnosis Auction UI to participate in those auctions if you wanted to. And again, this is not something that like an ordinary, like similar to minting and redeeming, an ordinary user probably wouldn't participate in those auctions very often. That's probably something that like a more sophisticated arbitrager would do. And they might even have bots that are doing that. So it might not be that they do it through the UI, but you also can see the auctions and participate in them through that UI. So that's kind of an overview of the functionality that's included in that initial dApp.
Is there a benefit in an individual doing those auctions? Is there something they can gain from that, or is it really only for bots mostly?
Well, I mean, you make money by doing it, but you have to have a lot of capital, and you have to be sort of sophisticated enough to make those trades. But basically, let's say that there's an R token that has, let's just make it simple, it has like some USDC backing, and governance has voted to change that USDC out for DAI. And so basically now you have some number of millions of dollars of USDC that needs to be traded for DAI. And so you can go bid in that auction. And obviously, you would bid a price where you would earn a little bit of money by making that trade. And so it's a competition. The auction will obviously take the best price that it gets. But if there's just profit motivated bidders, then nobody would bid exactly 1-to-1. And so there would end up being like a small spread in that trade. And so basically the protocol ends up, sort of the R token holders collectively end up paying the winning bidders in that auction to swap out, one collateral asset for another. So you can earn money, but it's going to be like a small amount, and you need a large amount of capital to participate. So that's why it probably would mostly be, large capital allocators participating in those.
Makes sense. I'm excited to see how it works because I haven't actually seen auctions yet, or Gnosis auctions. All right. I have another. I want to kind of switch back to RSR. a question that obviously we get a lot of questions about RSR in the community. I'm not sure if this is something you have thought about before, but some of our community members, they wonder, so after mainnet launch, there is the use case of insurance and there's the use case of governance for RSR. But some people wonder, could it be that RSR, the RSR tokens, get more utility in the future? And I'm going to give an example so you kind of get what I mean. An example that someone in the community gave me was the crypto.com debit card. So the way it works there is you have the CRO token, and the more of the token you stake, the more discounts you get on card purchases. Do you see, not specifically that use case, but do you see a future where RSR has alternative use and governance? Or is there a reason why we should not go to alternative use cases?
It's a it's a very good question, but it's a tricky question because if there were possible alternate use cases, that's probably the sort of thing that we shouldn't speculate on. And so I guess I will just, unfortunately, I just won't answer that question. And then that's not like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, therefore there are. It's like, maybe there are, maybe there aren't, but you know, there's certainly nothing that's like concretely planned and on the roadmap. If there were, then we would definitely make that clear to the community. But then in terms of the long term, it's like, yeah, there's certainly possibilities. Like anyone, you know, upgrading the protocol in the future could add different functionalities there, and there's things that could happen off chain, but I think it's better not to speculate.
That's fair. That's fair. You don't have to be able to answer every question the community has. I think that's fine. Reserve Weekly jumped in. I think he has another question.
Hey, so during the consensus call, you said the average monthly volume was $100 million per month for RP. Could you tell us how that breaks down, perhaps?
I don't have a good breakdown in front of me, but maybe we can get back to you guys with that. Yeah, I think it's been over 100 million for a bit now, and yeah, it'd be great to have a breakdown. It's an excellent question. I just don't want to misquote the number, so yeah, I'll ping the team about that.
Cool.
I'll make sure to discuss it with the community team.
Okay.
Thank you, Reserve Weekly.
Yeah, Sinatra, if you can hold the ball on that, just to make sure, because I might forget.
For sure. We got you. Okay, I have on the list that I have put together with community questions, I have two more, which are really focused on the long-term goal, because that's something that Reserve often talks about. We often say, think long term, or we're doing things the right way, right? Because the thing we're building needs to last for multiple decades. And so I think it's important for the community to know your thoughts, or the team's thoughts on that long-term vision. Like, what is that going to look like? That kind of stuff. So the first question that I have is something that we have published on the website already, is the long-term vision for an R token, which would be a stablecoin that is no longer pegged to any fiat currency. And what that would mean is that even if a fiat currency, I don't want to say default, but if it loses a lot of value due to inflation or even hyperinflation, we would have a backstop or something to escape to with that new long-term R token. I want to ask you, or a question that I've received a couple of times is the team actively working on that currency already? And if so, what does that progress look like? And if not, when do you think the team or the community, maybe I should say, will actually start working on that. And I guess the question for this call is really, when do you think the community will see some signs of that work being done on the long-term vision?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I mean, in a sense, yeah. So as I mentioned on this last call with consensus, I think governance and tokenization are the two challenges that have to be overcome to get there. And then there's also, you know, kind of discussion of different possible baskets of assets. But I think that that's relatively less challenging in comparison. So in terms of governance, I think that you'll start to see research results from people that we are funding to do research on governance sometime in the coming months, because that's already started, and I intend to you know, have those ongoing, like, sort of basically have that ongoing work be public and work on engaging people in the community to do parts of that research as well. It's not intended to be something that we do behind closed doors, but rather that we do in public with the community. And then when it comes to like thinking about different possible sets of assets to back that long-term currency, there's one person who's a friend of ours in the ecosystem who has been thinking about this already, and maybe, you know, maybe he'll end up posting some stuff about it. Like one way of thinking about it is like he calls his idea sort of the American Wealth Index, where like you can look at, you know, for everyone in the U.S., like how do they actually store all of their wealth? Like what is all of the, if you can just look at the total breakdown by market cap of all of the U.S. held wealth, and that, you know, includes, you know, equities and fixed income like bonds and land and real estate and, you know, other things, some cryptocurrencies at this point. And so you can imagine taking that whole index, market cap weighted, and making an R token out of it, where it's like, okay, you can just own a slice of, you know, American wealth, or, you know, you could easily do the same thing on a global scale. You could say the global wealth index. It's just an index of everything, of all of the wealth. And if all of that were tokenized, then you could have, you know, a basket policy, which is just, okay, let's take an index of everything that's market cap weighted and rebalances, you know, once a month or once a quarter or something, and make it so that people can just hold their money, you know, use as a currency that index of all global wealth. So that's something that, you know, is being looked into and researched. That person in the community is, you know, talking to some of our advisors and doing back tests to try to see what that performance would be of that over time. But that's just one early idea. You know, it's just one early effort in thinking about like what that basket approach could be. And with the you know, with the protocol being an open platform, there'll be many different approaches that people take over time, I hope. So yeah, in terms of when people will start to see signs of that happening, I think that governance will be the biggest topic of discussion in the near term. There'll probably be some discussion of potential R token types, you know, in the short term and thinking ahead to the long term. And then I don't really think that we're going to have a whole lot of discussion in the near term about the tokenization of everything. That's something where, you know, it's a legal and political challenge, what's allowed to be tokenized over time. And we don't have a specific effort or campaign that we're planning on that right now. So there's nothing like in the near term pipeline there, other than, you know, me babbling about it on conversations like this from time to time. And, you know, we do have conversations internally about it occasionally. But I think that that's something that maybe would pick up momentum, you know, a little bit later.
Thank you. Before I ask my last question, we have Texi again with another question. Go ahead, Texi.
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah, so this is actually a little bit related to the index as far as I can tell. Now, because this is about the insuring your RSR, so staking it into a certain R token or a basket of. Because it's in regards to the dilemma of how much will you guide the user, or is it more of training them, informing them, and letting them make their own decision? Will there be an option for the less tech savvy, I would say, that Reserve could step in and say, hey, this is a default pick. With a one click, you can put your RSR in the R tokens that we have allocated in a certain baskets to make it a bit easier for those less informed?
We actually won't do that. And I recognize that that could make it easier for people, but it's important from our perspective that that people do their own risk assessments and that they don't rely on us. From a legal perspective, it'd be more challenging if RSR holders were relying on us to sort of make that choice for them. However, that's not to say that that others can't do that. So you can imagine a world where our tokens have gotten popular enough. There's lots and lots of people who are making those choices, and similar to other corners of the financial world where you can read other people's opinions or even pay an advisor to make choices for you. That sort of infrastructure could easily develop. It's just that it won't be hosted by us as the original developers. I think it's better for that to be, to sort of develop on its own as a third party and decentralized ecosystem, rather than us sort of offering our opinions directly.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So if I understand correctly, then in a good world where it develops further, we might see third parties setting up, let's say, ETFs for the R tokens in the protocol.
Yeah, or that's an interesting metaphor to think of it like an ETF, or you could even imagine it, as simple as like people blogging about it, saying like, I think this one really makes sense and here's why. But yeah, they're also, because of how smart contracts work, you could totally have a situation where you deposit your RSR in a contract that's managed similar to like Yearn, right? Like Yearn itself even could take RSR and then switch it back and forth across different R tokens as they evolve, and sort of take their management fee for doing so in the same way as they do with other assets. So that there could be sort of the simple analog, people just sharing information, but also even sort of the technical and automated management, via smart contracts.
Okay, thank you, Nevin. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you for the great question, Taxi. All right, Nevin, as a final question before we close this community hangout, I would like to ask you to, first I want to give some more context again. So Reserve talks a lot about the long-term goal and thinking long-term, and it's clear in the way that we work on certain things like protocol development that we really are building something robust. We're taking things slow when it needs to be taken slow, and basically the whole idea there is that we're working towards something that could potentially be really big, and that's why we're so careful in the current development. So I want to ask you, Nevin, let's think 10, 20, or 30 years in the future, and imagine, like, I know there's obviously going to be challenges and potential obstacles, but I want to hear your thoughts or your vision on what is the reason we're taking things so careful. Basically what I'm asking you is, look into the future in a best case scenario in 10, 20, 30 years. What does the app look like? What does the protocol look like? Will there be new things by then? Basically, give us your big level vision for Reserve.
Yeah. It's a good question. So I took some snapshots a few months back of different reference assets to kind of think for myself about what could the future look like for our tokens. And I want to be like completely clear. These are just example references. I'm not making any particular claim about how big our tokens will get. That's kind of up to the market. So we'll see. But like, let's run through the spectrum. So, as of a few months ago, TrueUSD, one of the smaller stable coins, was at 1.3 billion in market cap. DAI was at 9.5 billion. If you look at the two biggest stable coins, USDC and USDT, combined, they were at 120 billion. Now, if you look at gold, which people hold as an alternate store of value, which is not really aimed at like making huge returns, but just maintaining value, that was at 11 trillion US dollars a few months ago. If you look at the US dollar M1 money supply, that was at 20 trillion. If you look at USD and euros together, that's 32 trillion for USD and euro M1. So, it's an interesting spectrum, right? From 1.3 billion all the way up to 32 trillion, thinking about those different possible reference points. And where would our tokens land, in that spectrum? Who knows? It's a question that has many different contingencies. But, the idea is, if we fully succeed, to offer, an alternate reserve currency. And to get there through open competition and many different approaches to asset-backed currency. And so I think that for that question of like, well, what does it really look like if we really get there? I imagine the possibility of different central banks and treasuries around the world deciding to use a particular art token, maybe a couple of them, to store value, and possibly reaching the point where it's used as a means of exchange in many different countries. And so numbers like those would be possible if that happened. And so if you think about the implications of that, there's a lot of implications of that, and it's hard to understand exactly what all the consequences would be, but we do our best. It's just so much would be at stake in that situation, obviously. And so, when we talk about like going slowly and trying to think ahead and understand how to avoid risks, in essence, we're actually building something that's like much more conservative, much more, much less out there than most other cryptocurrency projects. And so, it's using the same technologies, it's using the same idea of decentralization, but there's a lot of responsibility, right? Like if you imagine you're one of the programmers and you're working on developing the software, and that like that's the possible outcome, like in the full success case, you really, really, really want to get that right. For yourself and for your reputation and just for the world at large. So that's kind of the that's the North Star that I'm aiming for. And then, obviously there's a lot of challenges to getting there. I don't know, Sinatra, if you had any follow-up questions on more of the details or nuance of that, but in a big sense, that's how I think about it.
I think it mostly answers it, and I think so that you spoke more on the volume of the currency itself. I guess it's everyone has heard, or if not, then I'm going to talk about it now. The goal for the app itself would be not only to be a mobile app, but also be a web-based platform. Correct me if I'm saying something correct here. And it would be globally available. And I think. And this might be a look into really the future, but it would be more than what it is now, as in it won't just be exchanging local currencies for our tokens anymore. It would be a much bigger financial tool. It would encapsulate more financial tools besides only the transacting, but then in hopefully huge volumes. Anything you want to say about it, Nevin?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the way we think about it, it's like we want there to be a platform that enables, everything you want to do with money via, crypto. And obviously, there are many different companies building many different platforms, and so it won't just be us. But we have a particular vision of using crypto as ordinary money, and we think that we think that there's going to be a niche for offering a lot of services that aren't necessarily focused on by existing exchanges, and so if RPay is successful, then its maximum potential, if it were to reach its full level of success, it would be the #1 most used financial platform in the entire world. And I'm not saying that will happen, but if it really reaches its maximum potential, that's what it would mean, because we would there would be demand to use crypto as money pretty much everywhere, and so you could have kind of different from how we have today. Like today, we have different fintech apps and banks in all different countries, and so it's kind of this complicated process of moving money around and converting it from one thing to another and so on. You can imagine a situation where, in the way that you can send your Bitcoin or your USDC to anyone anywhere, you have that sort of full global availability, but you also have, easy fiat convertibility. You also have, a bunch of infrastructure for doing payroll and accounting. You have, different options for how you want to custody your assets. You have the ability to probably make and receive loans, and all sorts of other things, like everything that's necessary for an individual, all the way up to a multinational corporation, or even like a government or central bank, in terms of how they want to use that money, could all be supported by this one platform. And so that's kind of the ultimate goal for that platform, is to really make all of that possible. But again, it doesn't have to be on our platform. It's not that we want to be the rulers of the world. In fact, we'd rather not be. It would be nice if others made that platform and it had that functionality. We're kind of building it out of necessity because we didn't see any other project focusing on it that way. And I think the best case scenario would be for it to be big and successful, but also for our tokens and other crypto assets to be used, in the way they are today on many, many different platforms. I think it's a better situation for society if it doesn't end up being a centralized monopoly in that way. So that's not the objective.
I think you answered that perfectly, Nevin. Okay. To end this call, I want to thank two parties. I want to again thank you, Nevin, for the willingness to be here. Like community calls like these, I think are very important. At least if I listen to the feedback of the community, and your willingness to jump in front of the people, even if there are some critics here and there. I've said that before, but I really appreciate that. The second party I want to thank is just the community, the people that are here. Like every community call we have, I see a lot of the same people coming here, even during easy market conditions, but also during hard market conditions. And I just wanted to show that appreciation for this reserve community. I know that the team does everything to make the project a success, and I just wanted to show that appreciation for the community. Last question that I want to ask, not for Nevin but for the community, is if you have suggestions for us as community managers for things to do. That means community calls like these or other types of events, something that we're lacking, something that we're not answering. Feel free to message myself, I'm Sinatra, or Smeddy, or anyone else, or you can also message the Reserve Protocol account, and we'll make sure to act on that, because we really want to take the feedback of the community to heart and be able to act on that. All right, again, thanks everyone for being here. We're going to close the community call now, and I hope we can do another one of these very soon. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Sinatra.